Surely by logic, since F1 cars can run on street circuits, does that mean F1 cars are street legal? Of course, I know a lot of you may be thinking I'm completely off my rocker, but you'd be surprised how many people actually ask and search for the question, are F1 cars road legal? So allow me to explain to you why they're not, but how they could be. So here's me appeasing the algo, and if you already know the answer, I think you might learn a thing or two as well. A couple of interesting facts here. Since the Singaporean Grand Prix is about to start, I think it's right to talk about street circuits and why F1 cars haven't really translated well to the road. But one manufacturer has actually come close, and that will be the subject later on in the video. The Marina Bay Street Circuit is actually a pretty interesting one, and I've actually just finished watching Free Practice 1, and already I love the new layout. That brand new straight, I really want that to stay, and I think a lot of you do too. Comment below whether you actually like that new configuration or not. But I can understand why some newbies to Formula One might be thinking, well, it's a street circuit and F1 cars can run on it, it doesn't destroy the actual road, then why can't you just take an F1 car, buy one, and then run it on the road all the time? Well, for starters, you'd need very deep pockets to buy a Formula One car, especially one that has a functioning engine, and you don't need multiple laptops to turn it on, because essentially, a Formula One car is constantly on life support because you need computers to run the fluids through, it needs to be kept warm all the time, you need another computer to actually talk to the F1 computer and then make it go on. It's a bit of a faff, honestly, so it sounds really cool, but it actually isn't. Not to mention the fact you would need about a dozen people to actually help you run it. You can't just jump in yourself and then turn the key and off you go. But aside from that, what are the things that are actually stopping you from buying an F1 car and actually running it on the road spec-wise as if it just came off the circuit? Well, there are multiple things stopping you from that. First off, the F1 tyres themselves aren't exactly safe to use on public roads, not to mention the fact they are really, really loud. They're not built for comfort, so they don't really meet noise standards as well as emissions levels, so you need to actually replace the tyres with road ones with treads so you can run them in all weather. Then of course you'd have to have indicators, lights so you can actually run it in the dark, and a place to put a license plate, which to me actually, the rear wing, modern F1 rear wings would actually be perfect. Because can you imagine you just stick the license plate on the back and then it will just flap around when you're using DRS? Actually, probably don't use DRS, because if you want to avoid the speed camera, just turn on your DRS and you'll be good. Then you have to add a windscreen or some kind of screen protector, and the halo is actually not good enough. So an F1 car with a halo, that's not going to meet the standard. But I suppose you can get around it by having a bike helmet or something like that. Then you'd have to, I'm sorry, make the exhaust quieter and smaller so it doesn't sound as loud, because some F1 cars can actually go past 130 decibels. You're right next to it. So that's why you need those ear protectors. It's really loud, trust me. I've been to F1 testing. It can hurt your ears sometimes if you're too close. And then of course you've got to filter noxious gases and stuff, which F1 cars don't really need to worry about. Now that's not to say that companies haven't tried to design an F1 car for the road, but every time I hear F1 car for the road, I'm like, really? Is it going to be from a manufacturer that I recognize, or is it going to be somebody who built it out of a shed and it kind of looks like a Formula One car, but it isn't really because they don't have the pedigree? I mean, of course, there's the Ferrari F50, the McLaren F1. Those are two of the quintessential examples of trying to translate an F1 car for the road. Whether they use an F1 engine or they use F1 components and then it's an actual supercar or hypercar shell. Gordon Murray's McLaren F1 is probably the most recognizable one out of all of them, from the 90s especially. Then there are more modern interpretations like the Aston Martin Valkyrie that was actually designed in part with Red Bull and Adrian Newey, but it kind of went into limbo when Aston Martin took over properly and Red Bull were kind of pushed out, they stopped being sponsors. But now it's actually sort of being brought back up again for the World Endurance Championship for 2025 maybe? Maybe that's where Lance Stroll might be pushed off to, maybe, to spearhead it. Then of course there's the AMG 1, the McLaren P1. These cars share some F1 components. The AMG 1 is probably the closest of the modern iterations because it does actually use an F1 engine but detuned and reconfigured for the road and stuff like that. But it's still not looking like an F1 car. It's not got wings, it's not got an open cockpit and stuff like that. It's just a big bulky car with F1 parts in it. So to me, that's simply not good enough. But I can tell you, there is one F1 manufacturer which has taken part in an F1 weekend which actually has gotten the closest to what I would describe is an F1 looking car with F1 components in it. And that manufacturer is Lola. Yes, that Lola. No, I'm not making it up. Technically, Lola do have an F1 pedigree, and they have been involved in various other teams in F1 over the years in some capacity. But this, the Lola F1R, is their example of what could be done with ingenuity, money, patience, a lot of it, and a bet. Because of course, in a typical British way, amongst engineers, it was basically a bunch of people who worked for Lola said, I bet you can't make an F1 car for the road. Somebody goes, I bet that I can. All right, prove it. And somebody actually did. This Lola F1R can be driven on UK roads as well as European roads because it has everything that you require, all the stuff that I listed earlier, as well as a V5 document, which, if you're from the UK, is very important if you want to actually declare your car as on the road and you can actually drive it legally. And sure enough, on the front wing, there is a sign for a license plate. But unfortunately, it's not on the rear wing, which is an absolute shame. But if it were up to me, I would so put it on there. But no, it's like a motorbike thing on the side because it has got wheel covers, so yeah, it's like that. It's a little bit boring in my opinion, but oh well, it's legal. But my first impressions for this is that, yeah, it looks like an F1 car, but it kind of looks more like an F3 car, honestly. But hey, I'm not going to be complaining. This is the closest and most convincing that I have seen, but it's not exactly a looker. But then again, if you're driving it, you're not going to be looking at it. And if the performance is to be said, then it's pretty good. But can you actually buy it? Well, not at the moment because there's only one of a kind and nobody really knows where it's gone. But Bonham Cars, where it was listed back in 2016, actually goes into detail about the origins of this particular prototype or existing one of a kind. It's kind of hard to say, but it does work and it's functional and you can drive it on the road. Not to mention for the fact it's only got 25 miles on the clock apparently. This was all spearheaded by Lola engineer Russell Aniston. And he actually wanted to take it upon himself to actually honour that bet and make an F1 car that is capable of running on UK roads. And eventually it did become road legal in 2009, even though it actually started back in 1996, whilst Lola were developing their F1 project alongside with MasterCard in 1996. Okay, well, what components does this F1R use from the Lola project? According to Bonham's, which is where I got the photographs from and where it's still listed, it actually uses a similar tub to the Formula One car, as well as wings, suspension, the nose cone, body panels, radiator ducting, and other ancillaries. So basically a lot of components that were used in the F1 car that you can't really see, but honestly, they are there. And this was obviously, as Lola were developing this car, it might have looked like this maybe. Is it any worse looking than the actual Lola car that we got? Well, it's not really their fault, honestly, that they built an absolute barn door. You thought the McLaren MCL60 at the beginning of this season was a barn door? This was even worse, 11 seconds off of everyone else in Australia qualifying. And sadly, there is no V10 engine from the F1 project in there either, but there was a good reason for that, because they thought they would actually not work well in terms of the balance of the car on UK roads. So there's actually a Cosworth 4-pot engine in there, which was actually a little bit more suitable, from a Ford RS Sierra, which is actually a car that my dad used to have. It actually let me drive up and down the ramp whenever he had to work on it when I was a young'un. It still could pump out 370 horsepower. A lot of these components were probably stuff that was borrowed from the Formula One car, because after MasterCard pulled out of their collaboration with Lola because they weren't good enough, which was actually their own fault because they rushed Lola into actually making it for the 1997 grid, they actually had to rush it to Melbourne 1997, and it's a miracle they even did so to make it functional, albeit really slow. The team couldn't keep up realistically. Didn't get used at all were the hopes of Vincenzo Sospiri actually getting a Formula One career. And this guy was actually kind of good, because Michael Schumacher himself deemed him somebody to keep an eye on. So if Michael Schumacher says to you that, watch out for that guy, he's actually kind of good, then just makes it all the more tragic, really. Makes you wonder what might have happened if Lola joined in 1998. They might have actually been pretty decent. Like they wanted to. Thanks, MasterCard. And like I said, it's a one-of-a-kind vehicle. They have not made another one, so you got to be really careful with it. And it was actually listed between £55,000 and £80,000. As to where it is right now, nobody knows. The listing has not been updated. It's not been closed off. Did it actually sell? Again, nobody really knows. I wish I had the cash for it, but then again, I wouldn't fit in it because I'm too tall and a bit too husky for it. But it would be a cool addition to any Formula One fan's actual collection. What street circuit would I really want to put it on? Well, of course, I'd love to put it on the Montreal track, but I wouldn't really classify that as a full-on street circuit. But I would love to drive this around Jeddah. Jeddah? Really? Yeah, Of course, I don't agree with the principles of the country that it's actually based in, but if you're playing it on a video game, Jeddah, the Corniche circuit, is really, really fun. Every time, it's the only street circuit that I've actually seen where it actually makes me wince every time I see a car going through it really quickly. And that first configuration when all the walls were really narrow, oh, it looked really intense. It looked so good. It looked so much fun. And whenever I play it in the game, I love it. It's so good. So to chuck that Lola F1R around the track there, I think that could have been a lot of fun. But it's tragic that we'll never actually get to see more of this car, which is actually, to me, the closest road legal F1 car that has ever been made. Is it as ugly as the ugliest F1 cars of all time that you can actually go and watch next? Go and watch and you'll see why it might not be.